Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Henry Rogers. I'm the Executive Director of the Harbor Association of Industry and Commerce. Today, we're going to be actually speaking with Matt Chiller from Jacobs Engineering in regards to the FAST Act and several federal bills going through the, Washington right now. But let me quickly introduce Matt, and we'll get right to it. So Matt Chiller serves as Vice President for Federal Relations for Jacobs, a Fortune 500 engineering and operations firm specializing in transportation, water, energy, and program management. In this role, he is responsible for pursuing the firm's diverse federal policy goals before Congress and the administration within infrastructure-related public policy areas, including the promotion of legislation to increase the flow of federal funding to states and clients for transportation and water needs. Matt has also worked to create federal solutions to critical infrastructure spending problems such as the Highway Trust Fund shortfall and the need for innovative financing with solutions with the Army Corps of Engineers, and helped to shepherd those ideas through Congress. Matt served in his role since December of 2017, when he was with his previous employer, CH2ML, which was acquired by Jacobs. He served 8 years as Vice President of Government Relations for CH2ML with a similar portfolio. Prior to his work at CH2ML, Matt spent 9 years working in the U.S. House of Representatives in a variety of roles, including Legislative Director, Deputy Chief of Staff for multiple members of Congress in the Florida and California delegations. During his tenure, Matt worked on federal authorizing and appropriating bills, as well as a variety of other public policy initiatives ranging from national security to environmental protection. Matt is also a veteran of several presidential and Senate campaigns. Matt holds a Master's of Public Administration from Cal State University, Dominguez Hills, a BA from the University of Maryland, College Park. He lives in Fairfax, Virginia with his wife, Kate, and 3 lovely children. And in the interest of disclosure, Matt used to be my chief of staff when I was worked for a local member. So Matt is familiar with our port and many of our needs here. So Matt, welcome.
Thank you. Boy, I got to shorten that. That's inappropriately long. And I was going to say, throughout that time, the highlight of my career is working with Henry Rogers, and it's great to be genuinely. This has been great because we got to connect again. One of the things I loved about my congressional career was getting the chance to do a lot of work in and around the ports of LA and Long Beach. It was where I spent about half my congressional career. Really exciting, innovative places. Loved going out to those districts and doing the tours and giving tours to other folks, committee chairmen and folks we'd have coming through. So this is a great opportunity for me to get to.
Oh, well, thank you, Matt. I just wanted to, so we're going to why don't we get started? And for those in attendance, please feel free to utilize the chat function. We'll be watching those as questions come in, but we do have some set questions we're going to start working through with Matt. So you're in Washington. Tell us how the temperature is there. I know we have a new administration. What do you feel and what are you seeing?
It is funny. I don't know if funny is the right word, but the difference between the Trump administration and this one really couldn't be more different. And, there's also, particularly because of January 6th and the Capitol insurrection, there is a unbelievable amount of anger and resentment, and there's just a lot going on. And I think in part because folks can't see each other and spend a lot of time together here yet. I don't know that it's ever been this bad. From a relationship standpoint and members getting together to talk to one another, which is unfortunate. We really need to get past that over time. And I think as folks start to see each other in person a little bit more, that will hopefully get better. And I'm hoping that time will heal some of those wounds, and perhaps some bipartisan work on issues like this, hopefully, will make a difference, because it is unfortunate, and you don't want to have a system where whoever's in charge makes all the decisions without talking to the other folks, and you've just got this terrible personal animosity. There are a lot of things that we hope that folks will get to work together on, and that some of those personal relationships will mend. So it is a bit of a tough time right now. Sure. Among the Democrats themselves, tremendous optimism. The fact that they were able to get the rescue package done, folks are thrilled. And moving forward, there's a lot of excitement about what this era holds, the ability to do big things, that government can take a really active role and really make it happen is exciting to a lot of people. And I know that the goals in infrastructure and a million other different things are very high. And the hopefulness that the party, if it's able to sort of stick together, that they have the tools, just enough votes, and the tiebreaker with the vice president, obviously from California,
Sure.
To make it happen and to do what they need to do and have a really aggressive agenda and market it the right way. So it's optimistic. And I'll say the Republicans are pretty optimistic as well. They feel that history is on their side in terms of having a midterm in the middle of a first term presidential. They usually pick up seats. They certainly anticipate controlling both chambers in 2 years. So it's a very interesting dynamic at this point.
Now, you mentioned bipartisanship, and historically, one of the big issues that both Republicans and Democrats always used to agree on is T&I, transportation infrastructure. Do you see a new, greater emphasis towards T&I?
I do. It's one of the things that the president talked about. President Trump did as well, but didn't come to the table with much on paper other than public-private partnerships, and it just wasn't going to be enough to fund the types of investments that are necessary. And certainly, I think California, and certainly Southern California, speaks to the level of investment that's needed to stay competitive and to stay ahead of growing populations, right? So the Biden plan is much more aggressive. I think there is bipartisan agreement on 80 to 90% of what's in the plan. It's really a question of the pay-fors where we hit a brick wall, which is unfortunate. The rescue package that was just signed into law is 100% borrowed. That's not going to be the case this time. This will be at least mostly paid for, if not entirely, and that presents a wide variety of challenges. And what we need to figure out is whether there will be bipartisanship in the crafting of the bill, if there won't be a bipartisan agreement on how it's paid for, which is remains to be seen. But I do have some serious concerns that Republicans, and I understand this, will not want to work with Democrats on the meat and potatoes of the bill if they can't figure out who's going to pay for it. And if there's just incredible disagreement about, corporate taxes and taxes on those that make over $450,000 and how that's sort of all worked out. And the trust issue I got to before, it speaks to that. It's going to be really hard to meet in the middle when trust is at a potentially all-time low.
Sure. Now, one of the things we're going to be talking about, just because it's moving really quickly right now, is the FAST Act. And obviously, it's a multi-year plan. But hey, can you give us a little bit of background on how it works? And then let's look at, there's other funding plans that we're looking at. FAST Act, which we'll be talking about, the Biden plan, which is very heavy on transportation. And then, Congress is looking to do either a highway bill or reauthorization. Talk through those. What are some of the differences on it and where we kind of see them, moving to next?
So the FAST Act itself, the way that surface transportation federally operates is you've got these long-term authorization bills, usually long-term. They used to be 6 years, and now we've got a little shorter than that. This is a 5-year bill, the FAST Act, that was extended. It was going to expire at the end of last year. They did extend it a full year. So September 30th of this year, that will expire. It has to be reauthorized in order for federal money that's sitting in the Highway Trust Fund to continue to flow through the existing formula to all 50 states, including to Caltrans. If that law should expire and the money stops, you're basically telling approximately 800,000 folks working on projects around the country that they have to stop work, and then all that state DOT work comes to a halt. It's never happened. I don't believe it's going to happen. I cannot envision a scenario where Congress would make that level of an unforced error where they would let the program lapse and everything has to stop. It would be a political and unemployment catastrophe. So it's important to note that something has to happen on the Highway Trust Fund on the FAST Act reauthorization. So I would anticipate a new 5-year bill The House and Senate took a crack at it last year with higher funding levels, which is great news for everybody. The last several bills have been level funding just plus inflation, so really not enough to meet the growing investment and to keep us competitive with China and other folks. So we're going to see more money. The problem with the FAST Act and the bills before that, going back to MAP 21 and Safety Lube prior to that, is that the FAST Act is paid for through gas tax, federal gas tax, which has been unmoved for the last 25 plus years, and it does not adjust for inflation. So it's really been sitting there at 18.4 cents. And because cars are becoming more fuel efficient and there is some level of, small level, but growing of electric cars that pay nothing into the system, that there's just not enough money. So they've been taking money, Congress has been taking money either from unrelated taxes and fees or from the Treasury and putting it into the Highway Trust Fund just to get us by. So that decision needs to be made again. What is the appropriate spending level? How much does the gas tax cover, and what's the gap there? How much more money do we really want to put in? And that'll determine how much Caltrans has to use on everything statewide. And then that money will flow to counties and cities and other stakeholders for all the roads and bridges project, and transit as well. 80% of the money is 80% is roads and 20 is transit. So everybody really relies on this. It's absolutely critical. It is really what I believe will be the tent pole that's going to hold up the entire infrastructure bill process. There are a lot of other important pieces: drinking water, wastewater, broadband, a number of others. But none of that is critical with a deadline. And Congress works really well with a deadline, typically, where they're forced to take action and make hard decisions. So this is going to force them to do that. And I think that that's a positive thing. So the deadline is September 30th. I think the entire timing for all of this is really centered around that. So we're hoping that something is done late July, early September, where this entire process is finished. They have a surface bill along with a variety of other critical pieces that they can staple together and pass. The Biden plan is enormous, has huge money in it. The House and Senate each drafted bills last year. The House bill was about 35% growth. The Senate bill, I think, was like 18% growth. So smaller bill in the Senate, but still reasonable. And it's important to note that Senate bill was bipartisan. It got out of the committee with a unanimous 21-0 vote, which is very impressive. Even though it had a climate title, which was amazing. That was a committee run by Republicans at the time. So, we're looking at more money if we get across the finish line, which is really important. The federal aid highway system, in many cases, runs right up to the port. So things that you're doing on the highway system, obviously things like the Gerald Desmond Bridge, critically important. But also, it really gets into port infrastructure, electrification, all these different issues, safety issues that are really critical to competitiveness nationwide and ports in particular.
Now, the interesting thing of this, I guess I'm asking you next to kind of read some political tea leaves here. The infrastructure package, the Biden plan, they're all kind of coming around the same time as reauthorization. How do you think this is going to be sparsed out? Because that's a lot of money, obviously. And, Republicans, I'm sure, will probably be hit at their district about it if it spends too much. But it's also T&I, which people can, are usually fairly supportive of. Is it going to be parsed out? Do you think there's an appetite for it, or is there going to be some fill-in or one just large bill that we're going to look at?
The process is the biggest single question right now, Henry, and nobody knows the final answer. There is an attempt to make this a bipartisan process, which would put everything together. You would move these bills individually through their committees. So, for example, there's a drinking water, wastewater bill moving through the Senate next week that would basically double what's in those state revolving loan funds, which is great for California water drinking systems. And then when it'll sort of sit aside, waiting for all the other components to advance, and different committees have different pieces of this through jurisdiction. And when it's already, ideally, you staple it all together and move a $2 trillion package, which, by the way, would be the single largest bill of its kind in the history of America. So an enormous undertaking that the president wants Congress to do. So they're going to try to do that on a bipartisan basis. But if they can't get there, it's going to get a little ugly. And then we're going to figure out, do they have to do a bunch of other things in a partisan way that the Republicans won't agree to, but perhaps they can do just the FAST Act in a more bipartisan way? Or does all the money have to come from a partisan plan, in which case certain pieces will fall out or stay in based on that process? Without getting overtly technical, there's something called budget reconciliation, which I'm sure a lot of folks have read about. It's been in the news a lot. It's basically the ability to take a bunch of money and change it from discretionary to mandatory. You lock it in like Social Security over a 10-year period where nobody can touch it and it's really in there. But it doesn't apply to everything, and you can't write policy that way. So one of the options might be to stuff enormous sums of money into the existing structure, into all the existing bills. And instead of reauthorizing the FAST Act, they won't do that at all. They'll just extend it for a few years. And we'll all have to live under the exact current laws. There are positives and negatives to folks on the call for that. You know, on the positive side, more money through these formulas is always great. On the negative side, you've got all kinds of new electrification, decarbonization, healthy port initiatives, things that you won't necessarily be able to write new policy, but you'd have your money. I'd love for us to get to where we have both. And I think right now that's what we're still shooting for. But I think in the next 4 to 6 weeks, that decision is going to be made. Can this be bipartisan, or does it have to be only Dems? And what does it mean for what lives and what dies? There is a large fight over that right now. It's a messy time for that.
Speaking of messy times, one of the big ones that we were looking at was the President's Build It Better Act. I know a lot of groups are still reviewing it. Do you want to touch on some of the items that I know you sent over a deck that I can share with everyone, but just kind of over the kind of a 30,000 foot review of it, because we have folks on here from water. We have folks on here, that
Right.
are looking at EPA issues of, stormwater recapture, a lot of that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, if you drag that up, I can run through it very, very quickly, just to give a general sense, and this will cover everything, really.
Let me actually get a slideshow.
So the president's plan, I'll say generally speaking, thanks. It doesn't have absolutely everything. There are things I think that would impact this group, like Army Corps Civil Works, that are not included, that we, I think, would hope would be. But generally, there's a lot in here for ports and transportation and water stakeholders that they would like. Am I allowed to drive this? It doesn't appear that I am. So on the surface transportation side, there's a lot here. Basically, they're going to pile on an extra $135 billion to the existing gas tax revenues and give themselves a 52% increase. We're not going to get to a 52% increase. I don't believe that that's physically possible. The House was looking at, as I mentioned, somewhere in the 30s, which would be enormous growth. So I wouldn't look for that type of number at the end of the day. That's just too high. The public transit number is also huge, but I do think that there's a real desire amongst folks in the Democratic caucus to transit's been ignored a bit for the last few years. And I think there's a real desire to pump up urban transit, suburban transit, Amtrak as well. I don't know that we get to a 600% increase on Amtrak, but I do think it's going to be serious. I think we should all find someone in our lives that loves us as much as the president loves Amtrak. It's going to be an important part of the plan. And that'll mostly be Northeast Corridor, or at least more than half.
Yeah.
But there's going to be some money there for everybody. The electrical vehicle charging stations is interesting. I know there's a real California component there. There'll be a variety of grant and incentive programs. We don't have a lot of details on that yet. The House was looking at a variety of similar programs with much, much smaller numbers. So this really ups the game. EVs and EV charging was clearly one of the things that jumps out as something that the president was very, very interested in. So there's money in here for airports. It's important to note it's really not a plus up based on what the federal government's currently spending. The port number is, and that's important. If you look at all of the different port things and add them together, the health, the new Healthy Ports Initiative would be interesting. We don't have any other details on what the president would want to do there, but I think it would certainly speak to a lot of what Southern California wants to do, and it would hopefully help folks that are going out of their way to take leadership roles on this issue and help themselves and the communities which surround the ports. I'm very confident we would see the broadband deployment. That's very bipartisan, as is electrical grid resistance. Saw those huge issues in Texas. This was always going to be part of the bill. So 100 billion each, I believe, is very reasonable. I know that Henry said we've got some water stakeholders. So the drinking water, stormwater, wastewater, that money would all flow through existing programs through the state revolving loan funds. As I mentioned, we're going to see some House and Senate action on that first before transportation. We're looking at a doubling or tripling of those numbers as we get through that over existing levels, which is fantastic. The lead pipe money is a totally separate bucket, which is great. I think everybody on this call would be very interested in resilient infrastructure. We need a little bit more detail, but there's a real belief that they're going to use the FEMA BRIC grant program to really have the first really transformative, enormous pre-disaster mitigation program to hand out just enormous sums of money, tens of billions per year if they can figure this out. That would be a game changer for a wide variety of stakeholders, particularly folks on the coast, obviously, but there are a bunch of other folks with, issues with wildfires and mudslides and earthquakes and other things. But I think certainly the sea level rise folks with critical infrastructure like yourself, this is something to watch, and this is going to be really important. We're paying very close attention to that. Money would go. There's needs within the Department of Defense. You've also got a wide variety of science needs at EPA that needs to get worked out. Superfund and brownfields of critical importance. We're hoping that number actually goes up. So there's a lot there on these buckets. And then we're not going to spend time on this. This is just a big piece else of what's in the bill: schools and federal buildings. And then there's another huge piece on the science side, supply chains, R&D. There are some interesting pieces here, I think, that would impact the private sector and some of the schools in California. There's a lot about HBCUs, biopreparedness, and climate R&D, which actually might be interesting. And then the last slide touches on how this is paid for. We're not going to go through this closely, other than to say it is really important to reiterate again that this will not be borrowed. They're going to have to pay for this. Every one of these issues, or I should say tax provisions, has champions that are going to stand up and try to fight back against what these changes are. So it's going to get really ugly for the next couple of months. And that's okay. This is how the process is supposed to work. It's not really supposed to just come from the White House and then Congress essentially takes what they're given like they did on the rescue package. This is Congress's chance to really get in there and fight with each other and come to some sort of solution. So we're going to see what this looks like, but this is where you're going to see the issues. And of course, we're going to keep talking and go through questions, but if anybody wants to reach out to me, and if Jacobs can be of help on any of these issues, please don't hesitate to let me know.
Excellent. Now, I got a question. One thing that has been pretty obvious, and a lot of things that you've been talking about, was a very heavy push towards climate change. And mind you, you're speaking to a California audience here. Now, with the president looping in or, weaving in climate change on a big part of his plan, reckoning that obviously it's going to be good for the economy, ideal for green jobs. Do you see this being a challenge where Democrats and Republicans might not be able to work together?
That's a great question. One of the issues that we've heard about, even if they get together on money, is that it can't be too green. And I think there are a wide variety of green programs, as you mentioned. One of the bipartisan ways of doing this previously has been one large pot of money that you give some to everybody, and then a lot of it left over is competitive. And if states want it, they can go compete for it and try to get it, but don't necessarily bake it into a criteria for every federal program.
Sure.
That's more the Democratic approach, where everything should be green. Every agency and department and municipality should strive towards fixing their impact on climate change and really being aggressive about it and making it a key priority. From a company perspective, it's a big part of our identity. So we are constantly fighting for, making sure that agencies look at natural solutions and being resilient. And we're beyond the point of no return on that issue. So we're engaged on that. I do think it's a big issue for the president. He's really outlined two things as major themes. One is racial and social equity, and the other is impact on climate change and resilience. So I think they're going to bake it into everything that they can and look for technologies and ways to decarbonize and move that economy forward. I think you'll see it as a theme in every competitive grant for the next 4 years. And in fact, they released new transportation grants today for $1 billion and changed the name of the program to make sure that the word sustainability was in there. So you're going to see a lot of that. RAISE. The new build grant is RAISE. Yeah.
RAISE. Okay. We'll definitely get that out now. We're coming towards the half hour. So I just wanted to give you time. This is more of an open-ended question. We kind of like to hang our hat here at the HAIC on our policy. And like I said, we do a lot. We do really well at the state and regional level on local issues. Top 3 DC issues we should be focused on for a group that's harbor focused.
That's a great question. I would say fighting to have core civil works included in the bill. I think it was a huge outlier that it wasn't. And if you're talking about port work, whether it's deepening or any other number of resilient related issues, Army Corps Civil Works is almost always involved. And not having supplemental funding for them when they have a $108 billion backlog is a problem for coastal states. So I think that would be worthwhile. You wouldn't be able to earmark it, but you could raise all ships, if you'll pardon the pun, to help coastal projects and port projects get done. So I think that's critical. Even if you just put it towards strategic ports, if you were able to sort of really be targeted, that would do wonders. I think electrification of ports, it's an issue I heard about even today. One of the Senate staff directors was talking about their level of interest in that issue and really driving forward port-specific infrastructure and jobs around electrification. And for ports that are forward-leaning and would want to do that, they want to hear from those ports, and they really want to drive that forward as a major piece of the economy. So I think that would be another great one. And the third, I'm gonna have to think about that.
We'll have to think.
I think if there's enough on the air quality side, I mean, for everyone's gonna have their own issues, right? But if you have a lot to be proud of, and I think California ports have been a leader in this. So if you can take advantage of your leadership and the work you've already done and bake those types of things into like what federal agencies are looking for. So have USDOT put more criteria on things like, social equity and air quality and what have we done for our neighbors around the ports. I think those things are important. And if you're already winning, force that on them as something they need to pay attention to, and you'll do better when the money comes out.
Interesting. Matt, thank you for the time. I appreciate it. I didn't see any questions come in, but like I said, we will get your PowerPoint out. And if folks want to follow up, which is usually the case, I'm sure they can.
Great. Well, I'm glad you can hear me now. Thank you again. I welcome any follow-up if folks want to reach out. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
You got it. Take care. Thanks, guys.